Kia ora, hello, and welcome to the ILANZ Podcast. I'm your host, Anitesh Govind. I'm so excited about today's episode as I'm talking to Jacque Lethbridge, President of the New Zealand Law Society. In this episode, Jacque will discuss her role and goals as the President. As you're aware, Jacque was recently elected as the President of the New Zealand Law Society, and she's a partner at Matteli McKeag, where she leads the litigation department. Before joining Matteli McKeag, Jacque was a litigation partner at Grove, Darlow and Partners, and before that, she was an in-house lawyer at the Ministry of Social Development and the Public Defence Service. Jacque, welcome to the ILANZ Podcast, and congratulations on being elected the 32nd President of the New Zealand Law Society. Welcome, Jacque.
Thanks, Anitesh. It's really good to be able to speak to you today on behalf of ILANZ.
Thank you. Thank you for taking out your time. I know you're really busy in today's world and you've got a lot of things going on for you. How does it feel being elected the President of the New Zealand Law Society?
Well, I think firstly, it's a real honour and a real privilege. The campaigning process was really robust. I had to campaign and meet with as you know, each of the executives of the sections and branches, and much of that was during lockdown. So to have been elected by the National Council of the Law Society, I really do have found it an honour. There's a lot to have taken in over the last 6 months in the President-elect period, but I'm really excited about what we have ahead of us. We've definitely got challenges, and I have to be mindful of that, but we've also got some exciting times ahead, and particularly I think as we climb out of COVID and have better personal connectivity.
Absolutely, yeah. So let's really dive in here, and I mainly want to focus on your new role as the President. But before we do that, let's just talk about how you began your career as a lawyer and what made you want to become a lawyer in the first place. What was the reasoning?
Well, I'm reflecting sort of on why it was I decided to become a lawyer, which I have reflected on, having been elected President of the Law Society. What really comes back to me is this idea that I really wanted to make a difference, and why that was, I think, goes back to my upbringing. So it was really instilled in me by my parents, this idea of serving others. My dad had a diving accident, so he was in a wheelchair, but he, despite that, worked in the church, and my mother met him when she was a nurse. So the ethos in my household was that there was always, no matter your troubles, there was always someone else who needed help, and we often had people coming in and out of our home. So that idea of wanting to do something in my career to make a difference, that seed was planted right really as a child. And so as I went into my teenage years, my parents really encouraging education, which for them was seen as there was no option but to get educated. It was really, by the time I was about 15, I had a pretty clear idea that helping people could be achieved by being a lawyer. So that's what drove me then, and it continues to drive me now.
Yeah, that's interesting. And as a lawyer, you kind of decided to get into litigation. What made you want to kind of get into litigation?
Well, apart from watching those TV shows which focus on lawyers being litigators, it was actually mainly while I was working at the Waitangi Tribunal. So I actually finished my Bachelor of Arts before I finished my law degree, and so I got my first job at the Waitangi Tribunal. And part of my role at the tribunal was to assist the judges in tribunal hearings, and often those hearings were held at marae. And so while that was an inquisitorial process, and at the time that I was working at the tribunal, the now Justice Joe Williams of the Supreme Court was the chairperson of the Waitangi Tribunal and Chief Judge of the Māori Land Court. He had introduced more streamlined hearing processes and procedures from his experience as a civil litigator. to ensure that the claims actually got heard in a relatively timely way, whilst also being mindful of tikanga. And so as a result of that, and witnessing all of that, working for the tribunal, I got to see, some really incredible advocates in action, and that really lit my fire as far as what I wanted to do when I was practicing. And I did my professionals while I was at the tribunal, and made a decision to move immediately into doing litigation roles.
Yeah, sure. And I remember you talking about this previously, where you said Justice Williams was part of the key role of why you wanted to get into litigation, and he he was kind of somewhat your mentor at one stage, isn't that right? He was kind of helping you kind of understand the lay of the land in the legal industry.
Yeah, so I worked, I was very lucky to work closely with not only Justice Williams, but also some other of the judges and tribunal members, like the current chairperson of the tribunal, Judge Wilson Isaac, and Judge Wainwright, and others. But when I decided to move, when I was looking at what I wanted to do, I spoke to Joe, and he gave me some really good advice about looking at getting a role that involved the criminal law, because that would enable me to get into court sooner and get more experience right at the beginning of my career. So it was really following that advice that the jobs I actually looked for were in-house roles, which enabled me to get into court.
Sure. Yeah. So after the Waitangi Tribunal, you've kind of gone into an in-house role, and that was at the Ministry of Social Development. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, I was a prosecutor. It was my very first post-practicing role.
Yeah. And what were some of the highlights as an in-house lawyer while you were practicing as an in-house lawyer?
Yeah, well, I've really reflected on this over the years, because I'm really happy I started my practicing career in-house, and one of the big reasons for that is I think the quality and quantity of work that you get right at the beginning of your career, and I'm no exception to that. I was required to learn really quickly as a prosecutor about court craft, procedure, evidence, and all those tactical decisions that you have to make as a court lawyer, because you actually have a relatively heavy workload. So that was one of the things. The second thing is, I as a young mother at the time, I was actually starting practice. What I earned was a really big thing, and that's whether you're a young mother or not, or young parent. That's an issue for all new lawyers starting out, and often in-house roles can pay better in the first few years in practice than in private practice. Yes. So I found that really attractive and really helpful. And I also think the mentoring that you get in an in-house role is the mentoring and support you get in an in-house role is really significant, and can often be a better than just working in a grad role in a firm. I thought, in particular when I was at not only at MSD but also at the Public Defence Service, they were very good at providing access to training on the job, and also through continuing legal education programs that, for example, the Law Society ran, like doing the Duty Solicitor program, introduction to civil litigation. All of those things I did while I was working in-house.
Yeah. I remember my time at MSD as well, and the training was great. I think I thought there was one of the kind of better side of things of in-house was the training that provided was amazing.
Yeah.
So Jacque, let's talk about your role as the president of New Zealand Law Society. What made you want to run for the role or want to be the president of the New Zealand Law Society?
Well, I was on the board, so that was a big factor. And I guess it was kind of a case of preparation meeting opportunity. So being on the board You don't have to be on the board actually to become the president, but that's been the convention, and I think that's sensibly so, because you have an idea of how the organisation works before you go into the role. And when I talk about, so that was the opportunity, but the preparation started, 20 years or 21 years ago when I started working pre-admission at the tribunal, and all the work I've undertaken since then. I guess I felt a real responsibility to stand forward and step up and give back. And that's really because I feel I've had great opportunities in my career and great support, and I've actually felt that support from representative organisations, including the Law Society, and the final reason, and this is really just a summary, but the final reason is that I wanted to do what I can to help ensure that the much needed changes that have occurred principally actually over the last 3 or 4 years are truly bedded down, but also that some real leadership is provided to help lawyers all over the country feel supported and celebrated by their Law Society.
Sure, and I think we'll be talking a bit more about that in a bit. But when you say the board, for some of the listeners probably don't know what the board is. Can you explain that? And when you say you were part of the board, what that means and how that works?
Sure. So, and actually, a lot of lawyers don't really understand it, and it's pretty interesting. So, obviously, we're governed. The Law Society is a creature of statute, effectively now. The Lawyers and Conveyancers Act provides for our existence, and it provides that we're both the regulator of the legal profession, but also a representative of it. So the organisation itself, obviously, there's a management side which is headed up by the CEO, but there is statutory provision by adoption of the Constitution for a board of 5 people, and that's made up of the president and 4 vice presidents who are drawn essentially from the branches across the country. So there's a vice president for Auckland, there's a central vice president which represents the central branch groupings, there's a vice president for Wellington, and there's a vice president for the South Island. But the board is really an executive board of the National Council, and that National Council is made up of 21 representative of 21 subgroups, which are again provided for in our Constitution. So that's largely made up of the individual branches and the sections like ILANZ. ILANZ is a section of the Law Society, and also interest groups such as the New Zealand Bar Association, and more recently Te Hongaroa Māori o Aotearoa, the Māori Lawyers Society.
Yeah. And it's quite interesting because, a lot of lawyers see it as a regulatory kind of body, right? NZLS, but there's the membership side of things as well. So it's quite different. So as part of the role of the president, can you explain what the president does? Because I think, again, our listeners probably don't know much about what the role of the president is. So it'll be good to know what the president does. There's no rule book for either what the president does or what the president is. There are some rules which we can see set out in the Act and in the Constitution, but to answer that question as simply as I can, the president of the Law Society is obviously, as I've talked about, the chair of the Law Society board and of the National Council. But I think more importantly, it's the visible leader of the society, which of the Law Society, the one Law Society that represents the voice of every single lawyer in New Zealand. Yes. And ultimately, that means that the president is responsible to the law profession and the public, who are our other major stakeholder, for how the Law Society functions as a fit for now regulator, as a guardian of the rule of law,
and as a strong representative for lawyers.
Yeah, and the role for the president goes for maximum 3 years, is that right?
That's correct. So it can be as short as 1 year, but traditionally the role has been for 3 years, and there's some really good reasons for that, and that's that usually that you cannot get much done in 1 year. You need that 3-year period in order to bed down the sort of vision that and change that may be needed over that period that the president is in office.
Sure, and that's the sweet spot. I think the 3-year mark, isn't it? Usually can get a lot of the challenges that are facing the law society, or from your perspective, can be looked into and dealt with in that stage.
That's right.
Yeah, and talking about biggest challenges, so what is the biggest challenge you are facing in your role as the president, and how are you tackling it?
Well, just dealing with what are sort of the largest challenges. There are a lot, so I'm not going to capture them all. So I'll just try and keep it at a high level. I think the biggest challenge over the next year is definitely for the Law Society is grappling with the independent review.
Yes.
So the review is going to examine the law society and the law profession and how we operate in our structured route to branch. And so that's being resourced at considerable cost by the Law Society and therefore the law profession. And so there's a real challenge to ensure that stays on track and that the right information and the broadest range of information can feed into that process to make sure we get the right outcome. The second biggest challenge I see is really relating to connection, collegiality, and well-being across the profession.
Yes.
And in relation to that, not to blame it all on COVID, but COVID has been responsible for a huge shift in the way that lawyers practice law. It has changed, for example, the way that the judiciary approaches court hearings and the court process. We have major backlogs now in the courts, particularly in the criminal jurisdiction, but also in the civil jurisdiction, including in the family court, and we've had lawyers who, all of us have been practicing with huge disruption and a lack of connectivity in person. And so it's about how the Law Society can use its central role as a connector of all lawyers in New Zealand to be able to revive that collegiality, which will feed into greater and better well-being for the profession. So that's what I see as probably the next biggest challenge. And a related challenge is access to justice. And that's a huge thing that where the Law Society has been focusing on for a reason. It's something that impacts not only the lawyers, but in particular the public, because if we don't have enough lawyers to do, for example, legal aid work, or even have the capacity and ability to do pro bono work, the broader public miss out. And so the Law Society needs to continue on the leadership it's shown to be able to address that. And then I suppose the fourth one, which kind of feeds into I put it, as an offshoot of the independent review,
yes,
is ensuring that we really continue on with the journey around our regulation and ensuring that the Law Society now is a good regulator. And is dealing with those really heavy issues such as bullying and harassment, which are still we've made come a very long way on the journey, but the journey is not yet complete. So as president, it's my role to ensure that that we're a fit for now regulator, and we're not waiting to be told how to do things if we can do them better now.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's kind of great for priorities that you've kind of set out for us, which kind of gives us an insight on what your key issues you'll be looking at, and that kind of allows the listeners to understand where you'll be focusing a lot of your energy towards. And I'm sure there'll be other things that you'll be looking at aside those issues that you've kind of just spoken about. But it's great to hear that those things are going to be looked at, and I think it's important that that's kind of dealt with. Jackie, as a president, is there anything you would like to change for in-house lawyers? Given this is in-house lawyers podcast, I thought I'll kind of ask you if there is anything you would like to change for in-house lawyers. If there is anything, you might think there is nothing to be changed.
Well, what we know is that there's been a real proliferation of lawyers practicing in-house. So of the 16,000 odd lawyers, practicing lawyers in New Zealand, roughly 1/3 of them are in-house lawyers. So it actually makes up by number one of our largest subgroups. And within that, there are a huge diversity of types of roles, sizes of teams, resourcing, and location. So, we talked about me being an in-house lawyer, and you were also an in-house lawyer at the Ministry of Social Development,
Yes.
which, that you sit within actually a really large team, and you've got really great resourcing. But you could also be an in-house lawyer, working for a small company in the Taranaki, for example, where you're actually on your own, you don't have other lawyers around you. So there's a lot of diversity in terms of the types and nature of those roles. And as a result of that, I think in-house lawyers need real focus, and ILANZ do a good job of this actually in thinking about those diverse needs. And I guess if there's one thing I think could be changed is seeing a real acknowledgement in the pivotal role in the legal profession that in-house lawyers play, and communicating that to the public. So in fact, we're doing that, as you'll know, Anitesh, the NZLS is focusing our next Law Talk, which is our major magazine that goes out to not only the law profession, but the public and other key stakeholders. And that's going to focus entirely on in-house lawyers.
Yes.
The public need to know that it's not just lawyers like me who work in private law firms and go to court that hugely contribute to the work of lawyers. They need to know the great work that's been done in-house. And this year, over the last year, and in fact, over the COVID period, we've seen massive innovation actually in that in-house space. So that's what I'd like to see, is just really communicating that to the public.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't know this, but in-house lawyers make about 25 to 26% of the profession. So that's 1/4 of the profession, which is quite a large number, and has increased, as you said, over the years. It seems to be and getting bigger and bigger by the day. So it is definitely getting. It's one of those areas where it's getting a lot of work and attention's being given to that space.
Well, that's right. And one of the things I was thinking about is I think that proliferation, that growth in number of in-house lawyers is a reflection actually on how the public and the private sector, both public and private, where those in-house lawyers are sitting, how much they value lawyers and they need them. They need them so much that they want them sitting inside their organisations as in-house lawyers. And that's just a really positive thing for the law profession to be celebrating.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just going to talk about your experience as an in-house lawyer. Before going into private practice, you were an in-house lawyer. What was your experience around the perception that in-house lawyers are different to that of private firm lawyers? And do you think that needs to change? Because that seems to be a ongoing issue that we've seen for a long time.
Yeah, so sort of going back to being in the Ministry of Social Development and the Public Defence Service, actually, is where I spent most of my time as an in-house lawyer.
Yes.
There was definitely a perception that if you're an in-house lawyer, you weren't sort of a real lawyer,
Yes.
a real lawyer in inverted commas.
Yes.
And now I think that has shifted significantly in the sort of 15 odd years I've been in private practice, but I still think there is a bit of a misconception, and possibly it comes back to that education, both within the profession and outside it, about the role of in-house lawyers. So that's probably the only thing I can think of that I think back to and think, that really needs to change. So, because, when I was at the Public Defence Service, I was appearing in court as a criminal lawyer, and I was doing exactly the same things that the lawyer standing next to me, who was a criminal barrister, did. There was no difference, but there was a definite perception that as an in-house lawyer, you're not doing the real thing. Well, indeed, you and I know, Anitesh, that some of the stuff that in-house lawyers are doing, quite apart from litigation roles, is even better than the real thing. They're very broad roles and can lead on to really exciting things. So, for example, we've seen our first in-house areas seen the first appointment directly to the High Court bench through Associate Judge Gardner.
Yes.
Relatively recently. So, so I think it's just that's the main thing I can think of.
As a lawyer, if you could go back in time, what would you have done differently if you were given a chance to go back in time?
Well, as an in-house lawyer, and that's where I started my career, and I suppose mainly junior in-house lawyers listening to this podcast. My advice is to take as many opportunities to learn and grow as you can in that first few years in practice in-house. And also not to be afraid to change practice areas, whether you move into another in-house role doing something totally different, or you then jump into private practice, and even then jumping back from private practice. And that's advice I give to any junior lawyer, is to really think about the fact that when you start off as a junior practitioner, you're an empty vessel when you first start. And in order to be able to pour out the knowledge that our clients need, and that you gain as an experienced lawyer, you have to fill your vessel up with knowledge and experience, and that's going to be much easier if you get much more exposure to different areas of the law early on in your career. And in my view, the gift of being an in-house lawyer is that you get that much broader experience to wider organisational structures at an early stage of your career, that lawyers and junior lawyers working in private practice will not be exposed to, because they're working in law firms as opposed to working in generally commercial organisations or government organisations. So those are the two key things. Take as many opportunities as you can to learn, but also don't be afraid to change. And in fact, have courage and change.
Yeah, and I think it's a kind of hard thing to do sometimes, that change, right? Because no one's comfortable with change. But I think, as you said, it's important to kind of make those changes and try out different things. I remember talking to a QC once, and he said, I was a transactional lawyer in Japan, and then I ended up becoming a litigator, and now I'm a QC. So if I hadn't, it was uncomfortable making the change, but when I made the change, it was the best thing I did. And I think that's important, isn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah. Talking about challenging and the challenges, we've discussed the challenges the lawyers are facing. As a partner, what do you think is the biggest challenge you're facing in your role, and how are you tackling it right now?
Oh, the biggest challenge is managing, that they're interrelated challenges. One is managing well-being of staff. So we've had this rolling a period of disruption with COVID, which, of which the hardest part, particularly in Auckland, was that 4-month lockdown last year. So that really affected staff morale.
Yes.
So I can, speaking for my firm, we really focused on, during that period, constantly trying to remind staff that they were supported. So we required staff to take wellbeing days off as extra paid days of leave, because when you go through lockdowns, it's very hard to, a lot of lawyers just kept working through and not actually taking holidays because, of course, they were just stuck at home. So we focused on that. We also, sent care packages and made sure that we had regular, to the extent we could, regular Zoom meetings. And so the wellbeing part and staff morale is huge. And we are faced with yet another set of challenges around that with the spread of the Omicron variant.
Yes.
And then the related issue, I think, as a partner, is just managing client expectations and the expectations, say, of external stakeholders like the courts around what can be done when you've got a rolling series of staff, some working in the office, some working at home, and then many of them just sick. So those are the key issues, and then I think actually a final issue I'd talk about is really thinking about the health of partners and in the in-house sense, the senior managers, because senior general counsel in those teams, because ultimately it's the leaders who have to really bear the brunt. And so also thinking about how you can support those senior people once things settle down, to actually have time out themselves and be able to have time to switch off.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's a big thing right now. I think a lot of junior lawyers or intermediate lawyers forget that the partners are being affected by this as well, as much as they are, I think, so it's important to understand that. So Jacque, I've just got a last question for you, and it kind of relates to the other two questions you've just answered, but what's one lesson your job has taught you that you think everyone should learn at some point in their life?
Well, as a lawyer, I definitely think that the one thing that permeates across my entire career is that you will never, ever know enough, and you will never, ever see it all. So you need to be prepared for each new day to bring a fresh set of challenges, but also a fresh set of opportunities to learn, to grow, and to connect with people, whether it's your colleagues, those people opposing you on the other side of jobs, and your clients. The ability to, the understanding that you need to be flexible will help you throughout your career. And when I reflect on it, every time I've thought to myself, I've mastered that subject, where I know I'm totally adept at dealing with, for instance, being a litigator in court, I'm very quickly picked up on by a judge, for example, on a particular case where it's a new area that I haven't dealt with before. So it's just being ready for those challenges, but also seeing those challenges as presenting great opportunities to learn and connect.
Yeah, and you might remember when I think we kind of told our stories a while back to some law students, and I kind of spoke about how my manager said, when you start law, the first 3 years you think you know everything, and by the time you get to 10 years you realize you don't know anything except for the 1% of the law that you practice in. And it's a weird feeling, because you always feel like you don't know something, and I think that's a good thing. That's a good thing, because I always say to the juniors that I kind of mentor, that if you're not getting those butterflies in your stomach while you're in court, something's wrong. And you might agree with that.
Oh, absolutely. It's that knowing that and keeping that in mind is one of the things that makes being a lawyer so exciting.
Yeah, thank you for your time, Jacque. It was great to have you on the show. You can follow Jacque on her LinkedIn, and I'm pretty sure the Law Society will be sending out emails with her details in due course. Until next time, be safe, be kind. Thanks for tuning in.